Now more of the Mid-Coast Morning Buzz with Richard and Jim. Radio 9, WCME.
Protest has been a part of the American landscape going back to the colonial times when we took our country from the British. With us is Rosalie Paul, who is a political activist and a protest organizer with Peaceworks here in Brunswick. Most recently, they were involved in a peaceful protest at the Brunswick Post Office last Saturday on tax day to protest government spending on military rather than domestic issues such as hunger, education, employment, and environmental reform. Rosalie, thank you so much for coming in this morning. Am I correct in saying you're a political activist?
Yes, I would say I'm a political activist.
And a protest organizer?
Well, you've used the word protest a whole lot. I think dissent is another word that could be used, and really what Peaceworks is about is educating ourselves and our community around what's going on and how we can effectively respond. Protest is one of those strategies, but only one. Mostly we do presentations, films, discussions, generally once a month and sometimes more often, sometimes at Frontier Cafe, sometimes at Curtis Library or different places. There are two such coming up. May I tell you about them?
Sure, absolutely.
This very Sunday, the 21st of April, at 11 o'clock in the morning, we have two speakers coming to address the National Defense Authorization Act, which authorizes this president and all future presidents to detain anyone, anywhere, on the mere suspicion that they may have bad thoughts about the United States. Mm-hmm. Our civil liberties are very much at risk. The American Civil Liberties Union is working hard to educate people about the NDAA, and we, who agree with Howard Zinn that dissent is the highest form of patriotism, encourage the community to come on Sunday morning at 11 to the Marl Room at Curtis Library to have a discussion with us about our civil liberties and why it is that a president at this time would actually sign a bill that allowed him that kind of power over us.
I think you're very clear on this whole matter of the president and the power that he has assumed while many high-level people stand by and watch to apprehend and administer all kinds of initiatives on various suspects around the world, and that's an increasing concern. Let's cut to the chase here. And what would an American foreign and perhaps military policy look like if you and your colleagues were calling the shots?
I think this is one of the great questions of the time. I think that we can make new policies. I think we can switch to a whole different economic system. We could move from capitalism to socialism. These are not the answers that we're after. We need to see ourselves in this world in a new way.
Yeah, but give me some specifics. What would it look like? What would change? What would we do?
What is changing is that people are stepping aside from the mainstream and they're building something new that's based on cooperation, that's based on care for people and the planet.
I know all that, but let's get to the specific. That's philosophical. Okay. What countries would we get out of? What would our policies look like in real terms?
Well, we have military bases. I think there are 800 of them around the world. We could begin by closing them, by bringing our military people home and training them to do other kinds of work than killing people.
All of them? Close them all?
Oh, well, I suppose it would have to be a gradual process, would it not? We're now switching to China. We're switching to Africa. We're all over the place with evil forethought.
Yeah, but see, that's where things get difficult, the specifics. You're talking about closing every single American military base.
I'm talking about bringing the military home and spending our money in a new way.
I must go back to my question. I'm going to hold you to it. Are you talking about closing every American military base overseas, yes or no?
Not all at once, of course.
But eventually all of them. Sounds like that's what you're saying.
I don't see why we need military bases around the world.
Well, see, I'm just pointing out, I get your big picture, and I would say that an increasing number of Americans, if not a majority, agree with it. But the devil is often in the details.
And the details have to be very carefully thought through and very gradual.
And it sounds to me like you still aren't sure about all the details.
Of course I'm sure. I'm very sure, but it's not an overnight process.
Yeah, but I don't hear you telling me that how many military bases, if all of them or if not all of them, you wish to close. I don't get
I've said I'm in favor of closing military bases around the world.
All of them?
Yes, sir. I've said it several times.
Okay. Well, no, you haven't actually said exactly precisely, but you're saying that you would close every single overseas military.
I would not have the United States represented by military around the world in the way that we are now, and I would have us gradually change that.
Okay. I'm still not sure that I'm hearing you saying
I think you want me to say that we should close them all tomorrow afternoon, which would be silly.
No, not at all. I did not say that. I'm asking you if you support the eventual closing of every single American military base, and that would include certain ones that are endorsed by our allies, and maybe in some countries that are not regarded as hostile to their neighbors or really hostile to anyone. Mm-hmm. Some pretty non-controversial bases. That's my question.
Well, sure. I would close them all. We don't need to be there for that reason.
Okay.
Rosalie, if you could tell me, how has the organizations such as yourself, that you belong to, PeaceWorks, how has it evolved over the course of generations? I mean, I'm going back to my own days, back in the late 60s and 70s and protesting the war in Vietnam and then marching for civil rights and women's rights and things like that. What does the movements like PeaceWorks look like now here in the 21st century?
Well, PeaceWorks actually began out of nothing. There are a lot of people with political concerns that live in this area. And when the tragedy of 9/11 happened, we came together very quickly in the fervent hope that the United States would not retaliate, but would bring broader thinking to this situation. And there was a large group. We had 90 people standing along the mall on Sunday afternoons during that first couple of months until it was clear that the United States would retaliate. Since then, the numbers are smaller, but that vigil, and it's a vigil, not a protest, it continues every Friday at 5:30 for half an hour. We stand along the mall to make a plain statement that we see another way, that we should not be, that it's counterproductive to be attacking other countries.
Sounds like a protest. Why is that not a protest? And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with a protest, but it sounds to me like a protest as well as perhaps a vigil.
Well, a vigil is something that you stand quietly and mostly because you want to feel your own presence there. And, of course, it's a protesting presence. Usually when you hear the word protest, you think of people speaking loudly and beating on pots and pans, and that's a little different, just a little bit different.
What strikes me is I mentioned a moment ago, much of what you advocate, I think, is quite popular. I think much of your thinking is very much in the new mainstream of America.
Glad to hear it.
It's reflected in the polls. Why are you, though, seen perpetually as kind of being on the outside, being on the fringe? Because it seems to me that is true also, but I could be wrong, but that's my perception.
I think there's a huge difference between what people feel and what they speak up and talk about. And I think we may be a bit of a fringe of those who are daring enough to actually speak up. But I think we speak for a lot more people that haven't yet decided that, okay, I'm going on the street and say this is not the way I want my tax dollars spent.
I think that could be true. I think you're onto something.
Do you have a gauge as to the effectiveness of the education that you do, the peaceful protests that you do, the vigils that you do? Are you seeing any sort of effectiveness in
I don't think it's something that can be measured in dollars and cents or numbers necessarily, sure. But I think it's something you can't not do. You can't not speak up when you feel strongly about something, and we see more and more people joining with our way of doing, and also we see ourselves connecting with lots and lots of other groups that are focused perhaps on the environment or on the economy more than on political policy and violence.
What is the face of PeaceWorks now, looking at the demographics? Again, going back to when Nixon was in the White House, and he kept saying that the moral majority was behind him, and then he looked out the window and saw that the moral majority of the people that were protesting were the mothers and fathers and sisters and brothers of the people that he was sending over to Vietnam, and then he lost it after that point. What is the face of PeaceWorks? What is the face of peaceful protest here in the United States now?
That's a huge question. You have an hour or two?
Let's limit it to Peaceworks.
Peaceworks will always want to hold on to its core. That is a search for nonviolence in the way we see each other, the way we deal with each other in the world. We are also see that everything is connected. You can't have nonviolent political policy unless you have a nonviolent sense of how we treat the earth. If it's pesticides or big things or small things, it's all of it connected. Just as we're learning, because science is helping us to learn this, that we're all connected, that we're all made of poetic items like stardust and salt water. And so when we begin to see ourselves as part of something rather than as a victim or an individual stuck by myself out here, when I see myself connected with the world of people and nature, then I'm going to begin to treat it differently and treat people differently.
Sure.
I want to ask you something that you seem to be walking around the edges of. Would you describe yourself as a pacifist?
I would, and I'd be careful not to spell it P-A-S-S-I-V-E-ist. I'm not a pacifist.
I understand that. It's P-A-C-I-F-I-S-T.
Yeah, for myself, I'm an untried pacifist. Nobody's ever come to me with a gun and aimed it at my grandmother. I don't know what I'd do. I can't tell you. But I hope that the life I lead and the choices I make will do what they can to prevent that from happening.
Here's my take, and maybe a little bit on where I'm going there. I would see an awful lot of people in this country, maybe some who haven't been there before, are coming around to a realization that we as a nation historically have been far too dependent on the military and far too quick on the trigger in some situations. But when you take all of that into account and think about it and consider it and study it, when you get done, you still have a reality that there are bad, aggressive people who, for really no reason or for reasons that really can't be justified, want to hurt us, want to attack us, want to, in some cases, as we saw yesterday in the streets of Boston, to harm innocent civilians. So that's why I suppose most people don't classify themselves as pacifists.
I guess that's a part of it. And I think I would draw your attention to a statement made by the Vision for 2020. It's a document called the Vision for 2020 that the military has put out, and it's online, available for you to look at. And it says, we will have full spectrum dominance. That is, the United States, through its military, will have full spectrum dominance over land and sea and air and space in order to protect U.S. economic interests. Now, that's enough of a headline for me. When I was growing up, we didn't have terrorist attacks. We had atomic bombs. We had to hide under our desk. We had hot wars, and then we had a long Cold War. We didn't have terrorist attacks. I think that we're creating terrorists by our behavior. If you look at what we're doing in Pakistan, I think we could look at the details of it for hours, and we'd come away with a sense that we aren't in conflict with Pakistan or Iraq or, heaven help us, Afghanistan or even Iran. There's no conflict. There's a blockade to our economic interests, and that's what we're killing people about. And that's not okay. That's just simply not okay.
Well, there's the devil is always in the details. You can certainly say that much American foreign policy arouses negative sentiment overseas, perhaps very justifiably. Absolutely. But it's one thing to say that. It's another thing to look the other way if somebody decides that they are going to vent their frustration by killing an innocent civilian. Those are two quite different things, I would argue.
We're doing a lot of killing of innocent civilians.
Yeah, but so you don't want to say too much about the person overseas who might be annoyed or angered by some aspect of American foreign policy and who vents his or her frustration by killing an innocent civilian here or elsewhere.
I don't want to say too much about it.
I haven't heard you say anything.
Well, I think it's kind of to be expected. think we're courting it.
Yeah, but what are you going to do to the person who does this?
I think that's an interesting way of saying it. What are we going to do to the person? I think we need to...
I'm saying, is there a price to be paid for someone who would kill or injure or maim an innocent civilian who had nothing to do with formulating the political policy or the foreign policy that attacker objects to? That's my question. Mm-hmm. And it's a very straightforward question that really demands an answer one way or the other.
As long as we keep that kind of dialogue going, we have X happen, so we have to have Y happen, then we will never get out of this loop. And
with all respect, you just ducked my question, but that's your prerogative.
Well, I'm not quite done, but I think we're running out of time. We'd love to stay. I have one other event that's coming up. Can I take a moment and say what it is?
Yes, please.
The following Sunday, on the 28th, we have a South Korean woman activist from Jeju Island coming to tell us about the Navy base that the United States and South Korea are building there, and how they've been resisting that for some 6 years. We also have Regis Tremblay, who's been there and is making a wonderful film called The Ghosts of Jeju. That's at 3 o'clock on Sunday the 28th at Curtis Library. Hope you'll come.
Rosalie, how can people get in touch with you?
I think the website probably is the best, which is www.peaceworksbrunswickme.org.
Our guest this morning has been Rosalie Paul. She's a political activist and a member of the Planning Committee for PeaceWorks here in Brunswick. Rosalie, thank you so much for coming in this morning.
Thanks for the opportunity.
And we are glad you came, and I'm glad you came.
Thanks.
Radio 9 WCME.